Nadia, you mentioned opposition when you were talking about NATO. What about the opposition, if you want to call it opposition, or other voices within Ukraine? It does seem that, among other things, the Yanukovych government is doing a lot to repress those voices, but also there's the traditional infighting within the opposition. Is there an opposition out there that can raise issues within Ukraine and highlight what's going on to attract the attention or help attract the attention of the United States and Europe? It has always been my view that the heroes of the Orange Revolution were not on the stage. They were in the streets. They're still out there. Is there any possibility of them coming together to raise these issues so that the United States and Europe simply can't ignore these corners being cut?
Actually, I just want to pull you up on one point. Use of the term opposition, and then in the next sentence you mentioned the heroes of the Orange Revolution. The heroes of the Orange Revolution, who I assume you meant the people, the civil society organizations, I hope we don't start looking at them as opposition, because you know, having studied many societies that are going through democratization processes, civil society groups and non-governmental organizations turn into opposition when government pressures them enough that they have to make a decision: are they with the government or are they against the government? Normal civil society groups don't particularly take a stand on are they in opposition or are they pro-government. They do their work, they monitor human rights, these are the kinds of, well, the kinds of groups that we work with at the NED. They monitor human rights, they look at what's press freedom, is that being supported. They don't naturally move into the opposition until the government starts putting pressure on them. And you see in Belarus, where any civil society organization that there is has had to make a choice. So there really isn't any middle space. They're all in the opposition, the good ones, that is. But in Ukraine, you have all of the civil society groups, but let's turn a little bit to the actual opposition, which is sort of somewhat disoriented, and I think the administration sort of does all it can, the ruling group, to keep the opposition off balance. There are rumors of opposition politicians being bought off to join the majority, which I think Mrs. Tymoshenko announced some vast sums that are exchanging hands to bring politicians into the majority in the Ukrainian parliament, that is the Verkhovna Rada. It's been difficult there are some rumors that the sort of the more extreme nationalist grouping around the party Svoboda is possibly being funded by the Party of Regions. I don't know that there's been actually any evidence of that, but certainly this party has not been very constructive in trying to help there to be a united opposition. So the opposition itself, well, the various groups that are not in power, let's put it that way, have not really managed to provide a sort of united front. And as well, I have to look with some dismay at the way that all of the parliamentarians behave within the Verkhovna Rada itself. And I say this with real dismay, because the Ukrainian parliament, of all of the parliaments in the post-Soviet countries, was the one up until now where real debate took place, where decisions were made, where issues were debated, where there was some sense that the people's representatives were playing some sort of role in governing the country. The deterioration in the Ukrainian parliament has been dramatic, where to the point now where legislation is just kind of pushed through because there's enough of a majority to do that. Civilized debate seems to have ceased. The opposition has resorted to tactics of blocking the microphone, and I do worry that this institution that really was unique is really losing its substance. Again, maybe this is an area where West European parliaments can somehow engage with Ukrainians. I think it would be a tragic loss if the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada became the same as the Russian Duma, where the Speaker of the Russian Duma announced that this is no place for discussion. So I think hopefully they can somehow stem that trend.
Yeah, I think the opposition has, since the election in February, has really been thrown for a loop and has not been able to recover. Maybe we're seeing signs of that with Yulia Tymoshenko giving better performances of late, but we'll see. And Nadia is absolutely right that the government has an interest in keeping the opposition down. This is where the Russian influence, I think, is particularly nefarious, where I think in the repeated meetings between Yanukovych and Medvedev or with Putin, and I think it's over a dozen now. I'm sure one of the messages that is being conveyed from the Russian side is, if you want to stay in power, you have to keep control over the situation. And to keep control of the situation, you have to have a parliament that's compliant, and you need to keep the opposition down and avoid any threats. This is actually where I worry about the relationship with Russia more than in any other area. A new president following elections could come in, annul the Black Sea Fleet deal. Not easy to do, but possible, and I think the Russians actually understand that. But it's where these steps reversing the democratic gains of the past, I think, with Russian influence, are most disturbing to me. That's what I worry about most, because that will be the most difficult thing to repair for a new Ukrainian president if these trends continue unchallenged and if they become even worse. So this means that it's going to be very important for the opposition to try to stay united, something the opposition has not been good at doing, to say the least. Nadia's point about the Verkhovna Rada is absolutely right. In the past, it really has acted as a check and balance on the executive, in some cases almost to an extreme. And now it is looking like the Duma, a rubber stamp parliament. And here too, I think the West has an obligation to point out to Yanukovych and the authorities in Kiev that having a strong opposition is actually in your interest, to make sure that you don't engage in extremes, to make sure that there are ways to monitor what you're doing. And that's thinking that I think is not prevalent in the current government. Frankly, it wasn't prevalent in the previous government either. There is this tendency to try to maintain as much control as possible. But so far, I think the opposition is still recovering and hasn't fully recovered. And I'm not sure what it will take for them to really restore themselves. Maybe resignation from somebody like Tihipko if he were to leave the government and join the opposition. I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but something like that maybe is what's required to shake them up.
Well, isn't it possible that something that could help members of the opposition become more focused and more effective, seeing from the West, Europe and the United States, more interest in Ukraine? I mean, it seems to me that as you've mentioned that there seems to be a lack of interest, a lack of paying attention, that has a very dampening effect on the opposition and how many people, are willing to stand up and voice concerns about what's going on in the Rada, what's going on with the press and so forth.
I think unlike in Russia, where I think anything that the West has done recently has really sort of fallen on tin ears, I think the Ukrainian government is responding to protests and statements of dismay from the West. I mean, we see in a couple of cases. We had the case of Father Gudziak, who was visited by a functionary of the SBU. Again, the head of the SBU went to well, supposedly apologize. I heard a readout on that. It didn't sound like an apology to me, but if he thought he apologized, then that was good. Recently, the grantees of the Soros Foundation in Ukraine have also been visited. Again, there was a quick response by Serhiy Lyovochkin, the head of the president's administration, that, oh well, this was just a kind of one-time thing. We were just checking. So. I think that there are people within the Yanukovych administration who are very sensitive to what the West thinks, and I think that is well, not only a useful tool, but also a sort of healthy symptom that they do still see themselves as part of a broader world. And I think having more engagement, I think, is a very good thing, and also on many different levels, which is why this policy forum, I think, will be a good thing, because I know that there are negotiations going on about business, energy, and so on the governmental level. But I think we need to grasp some of the societal and political and civilizational aspects of the relationship too. So I think we're on the right track.
Just add very quickly, I'm also struck at how few visits to the West there seem to be by people in the opposition. I know Boris Tarasuk was here recently, and he and a few others have been to the U.S. I'm surprised that Yulia Tymoshenko has not come to Washington of late, and I've heard that she may be planning a visit. One way to be forgotten is to not visit the West. And so it seems to me it's incumbent upon some of these leaders to either generate invitations or to come of their own in order to present their side of the story. Because right now, the side of the story that's being presented is the government side. And there aren't competing views that are being offered.